Hello everyone, I am Rachel with Ruby Lane and I am here at the Grovian Doll Museum. We are so excited for our next program and it is called Beautiful Bisque From a Sweeter Time. Michael Cananis is here and we are going to get started. Good morning or afternoon for some people, Michael.
Good morning, Rachel. We're so happy to have you here today. Today we have a really special program for us. In the past presentations we've done with Ruby Lane and that we've had you here for, we've talked about a lot of dolls with provenance. And some of them are pretty lofty. This group of dolls, everything on this table, essentially, we are the second owners of these dolls, which is pretty amazing. Many years ago, David and I and some of our club members put together an exhibit. And when we put together the exhibit, it was a doll's wedding and it was an extravaganza. And on the 4 days that it was open to the public, we had a little special lady come in every single day to look. And she would bring her friends. And her name was Mrs. Katherine Weatherly. And we became very good friends. And through her, we learned pretty much everything there was to learn about the Victorian era, because she was a change of life baby in 1903. So her mother was born right at the beginning of the Civil War. So she lived a very long life. She almost lived a whole century. We learned so much about her, about how people played with their dolls. And she had a very sharp memory, and she remembered everything about her dolls and her friends. And like, for instance, all of the Bisque dolls that are on the table here came from Marshall Fields in Chicago. Now, to know, so in a sense, this is what was available in Bisque dolls at Marshall Fields in Chicago. All of the dolls have names, and we know who made the clothes. Like, for instance, this is Dorothy, and Dorothy is a really beautiful Kessner 214. It is a doll that is available, but actually, of the girl dolls, it's a little more unusual to find. Katherine received Dorothy in, I think, 1906. And at Christmas, her grandmother bought Dorothy at Marshall Fields, and then she created a wardrobe of clothes for Dorothy. When the postman delivered Dorothy and her clothes, Katherine was able to open the present right then and there. Her mother wrote a thank you letter back to her mother while the postman waited to take the return mail. So originally, Dorothy had, these are all of Dorothy's things, but Dorothy had a tremendous amount of clothes. But because in Katherine's mind, her dolls were her children, she would never allow them to have anything shabby. So if any of the items became shabby, she discarded them. And actually, in that way of thinking, she did, in a way, preserve her dolls, because as her long life went on, she would buy new clothes to put her dolls in and then put the other old things away. And then in a way, that kind of helped preserve them. Now, when we received them, we discarded all the new clothes and, of course, kept all old. So this is Dorothy. And what's really wonderful about Dorothy is, excuse me, this fell down. You can see this is Katherine with Dorothy.
Oh, look at that.
And she was a very delicate girl, and you can see that she's 4 years old here. And she has, beautiful, a beautiful body proportion. They were trained, she was trained in dance and all kinds of arts, so I think she was nicely developed. But this is Dorothy sitting right here.
Love it.
Yes.
Oftentimes when we see pictures like this, they're not, the child is pictured with a doll, but the doll actually belongs to the photographer and not to the actual child.
That's true.
It's nice to see the child with its own doll.
Katherine her father was an engineer and an architect, and he made, at this period in time, he made $2,500 a year plus stock options. So they were well off, and they were very much into the latest technology. They had a gramophone, they had a horseless carriage. So they, this is a professional photograph, but Katherine's mother had a Brownie camera. So she did a tremendous amount of photography. Long before Katherine passed, she gave us all of her photography because no one in her family would have wanted it. So we have a complete documentation of her magical childhood.
Wonderful.
Which she did have. She had a wonderful childhood, and I think her childhood was the thing that kept her going throughout her life in life's ups and downs that we all experience. And she was very, very sweet, very personable, very, very much a lady, and had a lot of charisma. And she had so much charisma that as a little child, she was on a train trip. And on the train was Mr. Wurlitzer of the Wurlitzer Company. Now imagine in this period, the early 20th century, he was like Steve Jobs. He was a superstar. And he was enchanted with the family, and he gave Katherine this little music box. And not only did he give her the music box, he invited her to come to the Wurlitzer factory and have a private tour.
Well, I
she
hope
was just
she
a
went.
little. She did.
So sweet.
She was a darling little girl. The other big love of Katherine's life was Frederick, and this is Frederick. And Frederick is a Cameron Reinhardt 116A. When Katherine was a little girl, the neighbors next door had a baby named Frederick. And she would go and she would borrow Frederick. They would loan her their baby, and she would take care of him and put him in the carriage. So when she finally got her baby doll, because remember that she was alive when baby dolls became the baby boom, she got Frederick.
Look at that.
Here she is in 1914 with Frederick. And Frederick went on a trip to Washington, D.C., and this photograph was taken in Washington, D.C.
How wonderful.
And you know, she's older here now, but Frederick was really the love of her life. Unlike her other dolls, Frederick wore passed-down clothes. So his clothing would be whatever was left over from her babyhood and her sister's babyhood.
And it just fits him perfectly.
Yes.
He is so happy.
Yes. And in her lifetime, there were only 3 times that he was out of her care. When she was on her honeymoon, her husband wouldn't allow her to take Frederick.
Aww.
And then once Frederick, in her childhood, Frederick had to go back to Marshall Fields to have an arm repaired. And then once later on, in the late 1980s, he spent the night with us to be restrung. And what's very interesting about it is he went to Marshall Fields, and one of his arms is repainted. So today, when if you're buying a 116A on Ruby Lane, and one of the arms is repainted, that becomes a negative. But the reality is, all dolls has history like Frederick, where they might have gone to a doll hospital and been repaired. And it's really not a big deal, but it really helps to have the inside story of the doll. And this is a really beautiful mold of a very lifelike child. And Cameron Reinhardt made gorgeous dolls. And these are available, and I think a beautiful example of a character baby.
It really is. When Cameron Reinhardt started doing their character series, it was a very innovative shift in doll making.
Absolutely. And if you could be someone like Katherine that, I'll use her words, that worships babies, and beautiful, the character of Frederick, the baby she borrowed. This was just, this was delicious.
Everything, yes.
But Katherine came from a doll-loving family. This is her mother's doll head, and I know her name, and her name is Cousin Carrie. So this doll was given to Katherine's mother by a cousin, and then it was named Cousin Carrie. And she had a very old body that had gotten way too shabby for Katherine's, likes, and she disposed of the body because she is of the era, Katherine was, that if you needed a new body for your doll, you just sat down and you made it. So this was one of her someday projects, was Cousin Carrie. They lived in a big home in Chattanooga, Tennessee, so they were able to preserve a lot of the things from there were 4 children in the family. There was Helen, Isabella, Bob, Robert, and Katherine. So they were able to preserve all of their things because they had a great big attic. So there's a lot of things that came, like this wonderful engraved Isabella, a little mug, ruby glass
Stein.
mug.
How cute is that?
And there are bracelets, and I believe this is a little Stife bunny. I'm not sure,
Is it
but
velvet?
it's velvet.
Yes.
Rebecca Kaufman, if she's
if
she's
Stife
tuning
gal
in,
would
she
know.
can let us know. They saved, and this is one thing that I really love too, is you forget that I knew Katherine Weatherly as Mrs. Weatherly, but you forget that upon a time she was just a teenage girl, and this is her movie scraps.
Oh, how fun.
And we have Billy Burke and Theda Bara and Mary Pickford, and these were all the Douglas Fairbanks. These are all the people that she idolized. Charlie
look at
Chaplin, and then she even autographed them to herself.
Oh,
So
how
it's
sweet.
really a sweet little thing. Now, Katherine told me that how she felt about her dolls was the way that everyone she knew felt about their dolls. That they felt that they all read the story of Live Dolls, which is an incredible series of books that were published really at the time of Katherine's birth, and they all believed that their dolls would come alive at night, and they had to take care of them, so that way they would have a good life. So I actually have all of her dolls in their nightgowns right now, and I pretty much keep them this way. We also forget that boys played with dolls. So this wax over composition, this is Katherine's brother's doll Buster, and he's a Tommy Tucker type, and that was his play doll.
Oh,
Now,
Buster.
He was very rough on Buster. So almost 100 years ago, or 80 years ago, I should say, Katherine had him re-waxed. So, when you think of a doll being beat up, it was a boy doll. So it's played with by her brother.
And when you think of, it's so nice to have this provenance, because when we find dolls that have been re-waxed, again, we think,
What happened?
What happened?
Yeah. Was it collectorized?
right,
And so
there's a good reason.
There's a good reason. This is her sister's doll, Serafina. And Serafina is a Heinrich handwork. And she got her in the late 1890s. And Serafina had a wardrobe of clothes too. Isabella did not marry. Isabella or Helen did not marry. So all of their things went to Katherine. Now, honestly, Katherine liked Serafina, but it wasn't the same. She didn't have the same emotional attachment to Serafina that she had to Frederick and to Dorothy. And these are Isabella's, these are Helen's dolls, these two. These I don't know the name, but we have all kinds of photographs of them at Christmas time when they were taken away and given new dresses and came back. Not that long ago, our club had our 25th anniversary, and Katherine Weatherly was a member of our club early on. So we were able to reproduce some of the photographs of her things. So if you see here, there's a tea table from 1892. This is the tea table.
Oh, how wonderful.
So the tea parties go on. Her sisters had a double dollhouse that was like a twin house, and later in life they gave it away to an orphanage, but they kept the front doors. So it says,
oh, how fun.
Helen and Isabella, 1902.
Look at those little plates right there,
Yes.
everybody.
So that was a year before Katherine was born.
Christmas.
Now, Katherine would not have been allowed to play with her sister's dollhouse. She would not be allowed to play with their toys. Each one of them had their own toys, and they were responsible for them. If they broke it, and one time one of Katherine's friends sat on one of her doll chairs and destroyed it, Katherine did not get another one because her mother said, you were careless. So you have to take care of your things. So even though they were wealthy and they could afford to replace a doll chair, you couldn't once you broke it. One of the things too that's kind of, this is beautiful bisque. One of the things that you wouldn't expect her to have will be an American primitive doll. And I know we did a presentation where Kay, our volunteer coordinator, talked about her favorite doll in the museum, which is Lolly.
We love this doll.
Yes, everybody loves Lolly. And I'm going to give you some more information on Lolly. Lolly is very distinctive. It's almost impossible to know who created a primitive doll such as Lolly. But we know who created it. It was Katherine's mother.
Wow.
And we have photographs of her. And she was actually a
goodness.
good little artist.
She sure was. Look at that.
And I pulled out for you all today.
She's got a fabulous face.
Here's one of her works that she did. So, she did it. I'm sorry, it's a little dusty, but she was a very good little sentimental
Look at that. How
Victorian
sweet.
artist. And this is one of the pieces that she did. And ladies took painting classes then. So she actually had talent. Now, one of the mistakes that she made with Lolly, which the only way we'd ever know this is because of Katherine giving us the oral history. So all of the dolls had their own clothes. Katherine's mother made the wardrobe for Lolly. And this is one of her dresses, and this is another one of her dresses. But she was impatient when she started the project, and she made a big, big mistake, which she did not size the fabric. And in the early last century, when you got cottons, you had to size it, which would mean basically putting it in hot water and having it shrink. So when she made her clothes, everything is a little tighter than you would. And Katherine, almost practically 100 years later, could say, well, my mother didn't size the clothes right. So when she wears these outfits, they're are
just a
snug.
little tight.
Yes.
Well, we can certainly empathize with that.
Yes. Yes.
Look at that.
But
She
also,
is so
too,
wonderful.
one thing I want to point out to you with Lolly isn't that great?
Wonderful.
But look at her shoes that she's wearing. And then you look at these, she's wearing Katherine's shoes.
Oh, the same shoes.
So she was, Katherine was quite small here, or maybe Lolly's quite big. But I think the wonderful thing about this era of dolls from the 1890s, 1900 period, they're available right now. Mm-hmm. And, they do have history too. If you purchase a doll from a doll show or shop or Ruby Lane, it's not a bad thing to write the seller and say, do you have any history on the item? Because they just might.
They just might. Sometimes they have no idea or they got it from another dealer, but a lot of times they did buy it from the original family.
Exactly.
And it's wonderful to know.
And what's happened with these items is Katherine had, she married. She didn't realize that she'd made a very bad choice with her marriage. It's turned out to be a disaster. She had 2 children, two boys. And, you know, at that, say 1920, it wasn't a good thing to be a single mom. And her terrible brother Bob, who teased her through her whole childhood, he really helped put her on the right track and got her a job at General Motors, and she had a great, great life. But one day she called me out of the blue, and she called me to tell me, she said, "My sons are old men." She said, "They are old." She said, "I looked at them and they're really old." They did not have children. So really it stopped there. So and I think in a way, maybe Katherine knew that, and that's why she gave us her photographs. And eventually when she did pass, one day one of her sons called and said, "Come and pick up these dolls," which we did. So we're now the keepers. They're now our family's dolls. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I've had people pressure us big time for Lolly. And I had to remind them that, of course, Lolly is not for sale, won't ever be for sale in our lifetime. But here's the thing, they all go together.
Oh,
it's
good.
It's a whole family unit.
That's good.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And there are more things, and each thing is just really, it is a sweeter time. Because here's a little Valentine from Isabella from Mama, 1903. Just beautiful little sweeter times.
Love it.
And Katherine did say that her life had its ups and downs. She was an extremely positive person, but her childhood was something that she could really hold on to because it was a wonderful time.
Well,
and imagine, she lived through almost a whole century. Everything that we think of today, transportation, airplanes, films, computers. I mean, she was involved in the war, the full-on war, General Motors for World War II. She was involved in all of it and just had a wonderful, wonderful outlook on life. One time she'd broken a bone and she was very, the closest she came to a complaint was, "It's a complete inconvenience."
She sounds like a wonderful person.
Was.
And she went through all of these changes in life, almost a century. And the one thing that stayed consistent in her life was her love for her dolls, which we all share.
Yes. Oh, and it was an exuberant love of her. But here's her again. The little
there's
tiny,
Frederick.
There's little Frederick. Frederick was the great love of her life.
Oh, how sweet. Oh, thank you so much for keeping these dolls together. Oftentimes, collections like this come up and auction houses and sellers are quick to just piece it out because it's easier to do that or more financially, they think it's better. But you never, I would think you would always regret that.
I think that it means more together, and particularly when there's such a photographic documentation of, the Christmases past and the Easters past and their, parlor and how they played and clippings from newspapers. All that goes with these dolls. There's even more than what's on this table, but this was really the things that meant the most to her, and which is Dorothy, Frederick, Dorothy. Oh, and I forgot to point out, if you notice, sometimes when we're looking at flaws in dolls, and you see this little hole there, Bob shot Lolly in the face with a BB gun.
Right. And so that's endearing because we know that.
Yes, and somewhere in there is a BB. And he was also very naughty. He was as cute as could be. One day he took an alarm clock and he put it up to Katherine's ear and set it off. And one of her curls caught into the alarm clock, and it got caught up there, and they had to cut the curl off. He was in big trouble.
He should have been.
Because Katherine's mother, as Katherine would say, worshipped her curls, and she had Shirley Temple curls before Shirley Temple was even. But here's Bob, and he was really cute.
Oh, he's so
But he was
cute.
so naughty. And we don't have this, but this is his horse, and his horse was named Charlie Horse.
Oh, perfect.
So all their things had names, but he was a real. But you know, he ended up being her hero in the end.
Oh, sweet. It's
And then
so wonderful.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to plug a product but I'm not, because there's none of these for sale.
Oh, somebody just asked.
This is a hard to get item. And this was, our club turned 25 years old. And it fell to David and me to edit our souvenir book, which is really nice because you can see all of us when we were young, and all the club members wrote beautiful stories of wonderful things.
So
but it
great.
came down to the cover. What do we put on the cover? And no matter whose doll we chose, it was going to be a problem because someone wouldn't be chosen. So then we had the great idea, oh my God, we'll put Katherine on the cover.
It's perfect.
And not only did she get on the cover, she was also on the back cover.
Oh, look at that.
And
With Frederick.
and she would have been over the moon. She would have thought this was the sweetest thing ever. And anybody who knew her would. But I would imagine you could find these on the secondary market, but I don't know how to tell you how. We personally only have a couple copies, but it's a nice nice little book.
It is wonderful. These dolls mean so much to us and everybody that's watching now, that we know how much they were loved and meant to the child and the woman that owned them for a long time.
Yes.
And now they're here together for everyone else to share.
I mean, she had them almost a century. She did. She lived to be 103. So, I mean that's kind of amazing. And to think about this doll, and this doll, the Grovian is only the second owner. Serafina and Buster and Helen, we would be the third owner. So it's pretty amazing.
It is so amazing. Thank you for sharing this wonderful group with us. We absolutely loved it. We've had a ton of comments. Katherine Peters said, I believe I'm the only non-member to have that book.
Yes, yes. And so those of you that don't know what Katherine looks like, I'm going to show you. Let's see, I could find her. There she is right here. There's Katherine.
There's Katherine.
There's Katherine.
And Denise.
And Denise.
We have so many wonderful doll friends. I know they're probably watching right now. And pictures from the Rose Percy event. And there's everybody. That's a wonderful book.
Yeah, and eventually there is everybody. And the one thing that I want to point out too is the president of our club wrote a very nice letter to the attendees that came to this, which is that this place where we have our meetings, or wherever we have our meetings, is a safe place. Mm-hmm. So it's your safe place, it's your happy place, and that's what it should always be.
Always.
Thank you, Ruby Lane. We'll see you a little later.
We'll see you in a bit.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.